who have come through and come back to visit us in this particular space often recognize this space as being hallowed ground. And this particular space has done and has produced a lot of movements, a lot of foundational work, the grassroots organizing, not only in this community, not only in the city of Jackson, not only in the state of Mississippi, but movements that have resounded throughout this nation. And so a lot of those movements have taken place right here. So you should be honored to be in this particular space, in this place. My name is Keith Lamont McMillan. I'm the director of this particular center, the Fannie Lou Hamer Institute at COFO. We also have a co-director who is Dr. Rico Chapman, who is not here at the time. And we also have with us in this space who helps us to moderate the day-to-day activities that goes on here during this particular time, right here on this campus of Jackson State University. For those students that are here and for the community members, this is not just a building on this side of the campus close to the baseball field, but this is Jackson State. This is Jackson State. I just want you all to know we are part of Jackson State, so please come down and visit us and be a part of your campus here. We have with us in this space, I mentioned our graduate assistants. We have Mr. Mario Musgrove, who is a political scientist here, and then we also have Ms. Precious Vines. We also have Ms. Precious Vines, who is a graduating historian in just a few more months. So we definitely want to. So not to prolong any time, we do want to thank Professor Noel Dittler for helping us to organize. Again, this event is sponsored by the Institute for Social Justice and Race Relations at COFO, Jackson State University, the Department of History and Philosophy, the Departments of English and Modern Foreign Languages, and Gallery One. And so we do want to thank each of you for coming out. Now I am going to introduce to you, where I'm just going to bring up this person that's going to go ahead and finish this conversation, and so that we can move forward and hear what's ahead of us. And so if you don't mind, Miss Dr. Omar.
Yay!
Give her a hand.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's so good to see all of you here and the anticipation that's on your faces with regards to hearing the speaker who is going to come up. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce my brother, Dr. Akinyele Umoja.
Don't make me cry.
I'm trying not to cry myself. As you can tell, there's a lot of history here. And I would just like to say that meeting this brother in a Pan-African Studies class at Cal State Los Angeles.
West Coast?
Way back in the day, I'm not going to tell you, because people tell me I don't look as old as I am, so I'm going to hold on to that. I won't tell you which decade. Changed the course of my life. It changed the course of my life. It was a transformational experience. There was another brother by the name of Mjenzi Umoja. We were all in the same class. I was a psychology grad student, and I just decided to go see what they were talking about in Black Studies, right? I mean, I needed an elective, and I figured, I needed to know a little bit more about myself. It wasn't that I was not an activist. As an undergraduate, I had been an activist, but really did not feel grounded in who I was, what my purpose was, and I knew so much about other people, and so little about me as a Black woman, as a woman of African descent. So I took that class. We had some very deep discussions in that class as young people about the age of most of you. But I'm going to tell you what mostly impressed me with AK, with Dr. Umoja, was he was so serious. And he was so sure of himself as a new African man. He knew what his direction was. He knew what needed to happen for our people. And when he would talk about it, there wasn't hesitation. The only hesitation that would come was when we would get into these discussions sometimes and he'd be searching for somebody to quote a cite or an example or something. But it was no hesitation on his part that we all had to be committed to the struggle to free our people.
Yes.
No hesitation. As a nationalist, he made it clear, I love people of African descent.
All right.
Now, that didn't mean that he couldn't love other folk too. But it just meant that this was what his focus was. There was no hate. There was no discussion about what I hate other than oppression and discrimination. That was the only hate in our discussions. But the love was there. The idea of this struggle is not about civil rights. You know, if they legislate it in, they can take it away, right? This struggle is about human rights. Our rights as human beings that we were constantly being denied on every front. So I began this journey. Now I knew I was going to be Dr. Omari, right? But I didn't know I was going to be the revolutionary Dr. Omari. That's what my encounter with Brother Akinyele brought into my life. This idea that we have to use what we are given to change the course of this world. Because we knew that once we liberated ourselves, our liberation would lead to the liberation of all oppressed people around the world. So we weren't narrow nationalists, right? We were Pan-Africanists as well. But we were also humanists. And when I look back on those discussions, and you know, I used to go back and forth with them on the nationalism piece. You know, well, why we got to be nationalists, you know, right? And that came out of a lack of understanding of history, a lack of understanding of political movements, and the idea that somehow there was something wrong with loving yourself and your people above all else.
Right.
You know. So it's that struggle that we still face today.
Tell it.
We still face that struggle today. Now my time to talk comes later, so let me stop and keep talking about Brother AK. But it was through that encounter that I also met our late Mayor Shokwe Lumumba. So he really is responsible for me being in Mississippi. Because if I had not met Shokwe, I would not have been in Mississippi. So when I say he changed the course of my life, I really mean that. I love him dearly. He's a scholar. He's a family man. He has beautiful children and grandchildren. He has lived the life that he feels that all of us as human beings are entitled to. Wasn't easy though. Wasn't easy. It's a struggle. But that's what I love about this brother and my comrades in the struggle, is we not only talk the talk, but we try to walk the walk as best we can. As best we can. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. But as best we can. And we always hold each other in check. You know, he's had to check me a number of times.
And vice versa.
But that's what love and struggle is about. Understanding that we are better together. We are more together than we ever could be separately. I think that's what Mayor Lumumba showed us in the 8 months that he was mayor. Is that we are much better together as a city, a unified city, than we are apart.
Yes.
And so my pitch on that is that we really must struggle to continue his dream. We really must struggle to put those things that he talked about into practice in our lives. Because he showed us what leadership is.
Right.
This brother is a leader. He's always been kind of quiet and behind the scenes, and now he's doing book tours and all of this kind of stuff, you know. But he didn't have to say much to be a leader. He led by his actions. So I'm not going to say any more about Brother Akinyele. Just going to ask him to come up here, and while y'all change the course of y'all lives like he did mine.
In the name of our mothers, fathers, all our ancestors, I'd like to greet everyone here today. Since we're in Jackson, and I rarely do this when I introduce or start my presentation. Since we're in Jackson, some people are now calling this the Lumumba District. I want to say free the land! 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 By any means necessary. It's great to be here at the COFO Center. I can't think of a better place to be to have this conversation. I want to thank Brother Keith McMillan for hosting me here, Noel for doing all the hard work to bring me here. I just met Professor Jacobs, and she has just found out, should I say?
I guess so.
Well, she just found out that she was accepted to a PhD program. Certainly something to be congratulatory about.
Which one?
We'll say that for later.
Okay.
And then it probably was a bad idea to have Professor Omari give me an introduction. We are so close. I'm tearing a little bit. And so, because we traveled a long journey together. I was just at the University of Illinois, and there was a Professor Ron Bailey, who's the chair of the African American Studies there, a veteran Black Studies professor. And we were both talking about how, he was with Safia when she was getting her PhD at Northeastern, after she left Tougaloo to get that PhD. And we were talking about with pride that she served as the chief of staff for the city under Mayor Lumumba. And, just the talent, the insight, the hard work ethic that she has. But you know, let me keep on moving, because I can talk about her for days. I'm here to talk about this book, We Will Shoot Back. And I didn't bring my clicker, so Keisha is helping me. We're gonna move to the next slide. This presentation, as we've already stated, I dedicate to Mayor Lumumba and his wife Nubia. Why? It's not just I'm doing this. Actually, they're a major part of this being done. Why? Because most of my research, my headquarters was their garage. They had a little room in the garage, and that's where I stayed. That's where I was allowed to use as my office. The photo for the cover of the book actually was provided by Mayor Lumumba. And I never did a formal interview with Lumumba, but some of the people I interviewed were based upon, you need to talk to so-and-so. We were supposed to do an interview, we never got to that, but I felt I knew him so well I could just write that part anyway. He and I have known each other since the 70s. And so I want to dedicate that to him and his wife, Nubia Lumumba. And I know they're watching over this presentation in the ancestor world. So I know some of you in class, you got to leave at a certain time, so I'm going to try to go through this kind of quickly, and then what we'll do is stop and we'll do break for questions, and there'll be an interview done by Professor Jacobs. Move to the next slide. Now, how did I get to this story? Brother Shabazz is in the back. Why don't you wave your hand, brother? He's one of my friends on Twitter and on Facebook. And last night he asked me, he took a quote from the book. My connection with Mississippi primarily comes to my father being born in a place called Alligator, Mississippi. We were talking about it earlier. Not Coahoma County, it's right on the edge of Coahoma, but in Bolivar County. And my father was a sharecropping family. And one day, he said, looking at a water tower, he saw a black man's body hanging from that water tower. My grandfather, upon seeing that, went and grabbed his, I don't know if it was a shotgun or a rifle. My family, we were poor, so I don't know it wasn't too high tech. But he went and grabbed his weapon, and he was going to shoot the first white person he saw. The family tackled my grandfather and disarmed him. Why? Because they knew at that time, 1920s, Mississippi Delta, they would all be lynched. And so hearing that story when I was like 12, 13 years old, I was kind of ambivalent. On one hand, I grew up like Professor Timms, Compton, California. And growing up, I grew up during the 1960s. Sophia wouldn't tell you her age. I'm 60 years old. Okay? I was born in 1954, or we say 1954. Okay, I was born then. And during the Civil Rights Movement, and then teenage years, Black Power Movement. We didn't hear about black people in the South resisting. And we got, some negative stereotypes about black people in the South. They didn't fight back, they didn't resist. It's generally about all black people, but for black people who are descendants of slaves, who people enslaved in the United States, the South is our home, right? If you cut us in Chicago, you're gonna find some Mississippian in them, right? In LA, it's gonna be some Louisiana folk. That's right. Carolinas on the East Coast, okay? But we didn't hear those stories, so I was proud of my granddaddy on one level. But then on the other level, I understood the fear and intimidation the family experienced. Where does that come from? You look at this map, you see the reddish colors. You're kind of far away from the map, most of you. The reddish counties you see on this map are counties that were anywhere in 1880 from 92 to 78% black. So coming out, this is a decade and a half after slavery, right? If you want to maintain white supremacy with these type of numbers, what do you have to do? Next slide. You got to control the ballot box and have fear and intimidation at the ballot box using violence. The book starts off with the story of Charles Caldwell in this county, in Bolton, Mississippi, who organized for Black Power during Reconstruction, just really black rights during that time, but how he was killed on Christmas Day, 1871, on the streets of Baltimore, Mississippi, a part of a reign of terror to keep black people away from the ballot box and having black political power. Next slide. Organizations like this, enough said, I don't have to describe that. Everybody knows what that is, right? Next slide. These things were done to keep black people suppressed, right? We don't talk about them much, right? We associate terrorism with Bin Laden. But this is terrorism American style. Go to the next slide. And you would think, like, in this period of time after Reconstruction, historians call it the Nadir period, going until, they say, the 1920s. I would argue in Mississippi it goes all the way to the 1950s, right? Nadir period, what does that mean? It's supposed to be the low period of black history. I always thought it was slavery. But no, what we talk about now, Black Lives Matter. Black lives were a lot cheaper during that time, right? Hundreds of lynchings every year. And I say that, now I do these presentations and I think, well, wait a minute. There were hundreds of lynchings back in this period of time we call it Nadir. And now Malcolm X Grassroots Movement comes out with a report, 2012, there are 313 black people were killed by police, vigilantes, security guards. 47% of them unarmed. So I don't know if it's a difference, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. But hold on. Before we leave that section, there wasn't a lot of political activity during that time. There's a placard up there for the NAACP. During this period of time, when NAACP tried to get established in the state of Mississippi, they were always run out the state after a short period of time. There's not a lot of political activity, not a lot of legislation, not a lot of voting going on, right? Because, damn, you couldn't register, right? What is going on? Black people building families. Black people building lodges. Y'all know what a lodge is? You know, not a building, but an organization, a secret society. They're building businesses. We got a representative from Corporation Jackson here today. They were using cooperative economics then, right? They're building schools. So by the 1950s, next slide, we have enough resources to try to initiate some organizations that could be advocates. The first organization, you look at that picture, this is a rally in Bolivar County, Mississippi. Tens of thousands of people coming out as a part of the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. It was organized in the Delta, but had impact on the entire state. Go to the next slide. This is what Ebony magazine, now it's a bunch of black folks in here. Y'all know what Ebony is, right? I don't want to take no ghetto passes up in this piece. All right, but what did Ebony say? Today in Dixie, there's emerging a new militant Negro. He is a fearless fighting man. That's gendered language. I apologize for that. Who openly campaigns for his civil rights, who refuses to migrate to the north in search of justice and dignity, and is determined to stay in his own backyard and fight. Now, we in Mississippi, y'all know who David Banner is, right? What was his first album? Young people. You gotta know your history, recent history, hip-hop history, right? First album was called Mississippi. And on that Mississippi album, he talked about he was descended from these people who decided to stay here and fight, who wasn't gonna be run off to Chicago or anywhere else, right? That's this generation. Okay, go to the next slide. This is what, now you heard of Ebony, I know you heard of Jet. Your grandmama, or my grandmama, and your great-grandmama had Jet in the magazine rack, right? Okay, in every black home, there was Jet magazine, all right? And this is what Simeon Booker, who came to visit the Regional Council of Negro Leadership in 1955, this is what he said. He said, firearms protection and security are ingredients of a successful civil rights program in Mississippi. No mention of nonviolence, right? Firearms, protection, and security. The Negro social reformer must defend himself because he has no protection from police, sheriffs, or state troopers. The reason many more Negro civil rights are not killed is because they're armed to defend themselves and their families. You can turn that down just a little bit. Young people would know that song. It's Haitian Fight Song. Yeah. Somebody listening to their daddy's music collection. You can go to the next slide. Okay. The leader of that group was this brother, T.R.M. Howard. Y'all know what a accommodationist is?
Mm-hmm. Booker T.
What's it? Booker T. Washington style leadership. Mm-hmm. It's that we're not gonna be confrontational in terms of getting our rights, but if we're respectful, we develop institutions that white America will ultimately respect us and we'll get our citizenship. Now they thought this brother was that when he first got started. In 1946, the Saturday Evening Post, which is a popular magazine at that time, said he was a credit to his race because he built the first swimming pool for black people in the state of Mississippi with his resources, with his money. Then he built, what public money, because they wasn't going to give us none, right? They didn't value black lives enough to give us. What does a swimming pool have to do with black lives? Where I tell you my daddy was from? Alligator, Mississippi. There's a reason why it was dangerous to swim in those swimming pools, but water moccasins, and other things, right? So he built a pool for black people, a park for black people. So they said when he did those things, he's a credit to his race. But then when they built this organization, he talks about, don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom. Mm-hmm. See, Dr. Omari and I, we're old enough to know when you drove through the South during that time, your parents had to know where you could stop, right? If you couldn't use the restroom, you'd be out in the back pen somewhere. And Lord knows if you have to do the number 2. Y'all feel me? Yeah. All right. So he did that. Then they start talking about right to vote. And y'all remember the map I showed you and the percentages of black people in the western part of Mississippi, right? The place that some people call Kush later on, right? It's a black majority area. Black people got a right to vote and knew what the hell they were doing, had an agenda, maybe something like a People's Assembly or something, then they could politically control that area. Go to the next slide. He's key in investigation around Emmett Till because he used his resources to help support it. There were 3 people who primarily did the investigation. A woman by the name of Ruby Hurley, who was a Southern Regional Director at the NAACP. Medgar Evers, who y'all know, should know who you are. If not, we definitely taking that ghetto passage. And a third man by the name of Amzie Moore. Okay, now, they dressed up like sharecroppers because their lives might have been in danger if they'd have been, their regular clothes and they weren't from that area. But they had a team of black men with shotguns who provided them security who were in their perimeter. Okay, and that's how they got the information to find out who did these lynchings of Emmett Till. Somebody had to go get the information. The prosecutors wasn't going that hard, right? Go to the next one. Here you see Major Till Mobley. She is the mother of Emmett Till, right? And she's in a black dress. She stepped next to Dr. Howard, the man with the glasses. The bow ties has come back today, okay? And when she went to Mount Bayou, where he lived, she said the people in Mount Bayou didn't tolerate any invasion of any kind. What does that mean? They stood ready to protect and defend themselves. She saw that. In fact, she saw Dr. Howard had a machine gun, an automatic weapon right in his home. Go to the next slide. Here's a ad in Ebony again for Medgar Evers. And in 1958, this ad came out. Prior to that, a few years prior to that, Medgar Evers became the executive secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi. Why is that significant? I mentioned they had been run out of state before, right? So they were tired of being run out of state. They said, we got to invest in somebody who can organize in the state. Okay, somebody who's talented, somebody who's brilliant, and if he organizes a strong organization and we put resources there, then we'll have done our job. And they did. That's how the basis of the organization, from local interest, but somebody who was a leader and an organizer. Now, prior to that, prior to him being paid by the National NAACP in New York, Medgar Evers used to talk about developing a mau in Mississippi. Go to the next slide and then come back. What a mau is, for those who don't know, was in in Kenya, the Kikuyu, which is an ethnic group in Kenya, they had an organization called the Land of Freedom Army. Okay, and they were organized to drive the British through armed resistance out of Kenya. Go back. This ad says that Medgar Evers once believed in a Mau, but he kind of changed his point of view, and he was now nonviolent. Now you won't see this in the exhibit at the airport, but let me share you a little bit of information about Medgar Evers. Go 2 slides forward. Okay, this is Ruby Hurley, who was his boss in NAACP. Said, talk about nonviolent, he was anything but nonviolent. Anything but. He always wanted to go at it in a Mau fashion. Say, well, maybe she got it wrong. Maybe Dr. Umoja is exaggerating. But if you got a good marriage, you know, because we got all types of marriages, but if you got a good marriage, who's the closest person in your life? Your spouse, right? Go to the next slide. This is what Myrlie Evers said about him. She said, Medgar believed you must always be prepared for whatever comes our way. And we were talking about the guns, the arms, collecting what we need to fight. If by chance we ended up in what? A race war, which he felt could possibly happen. He was thinking about building a nation of black people. That's long before people were talking about free the land, because he died in 1963. But he was thinking, looking at what was going, and looking at the value of black lives then, that it was possibly genocide coming, and something needed to be done about it. And this is a possible option that Medgar was looking at. Next slide. Of course, now if y'all been up in this center and you don't know who the brother all the way down to your left, that's Bob Moses. And this is when Bob Moses comes to Mississippi in '61. This is the first time you really have the concept of nonviolence coming in. Okay, but Bob Moses was a very dedicated. Did I say was? Is a very dedicated and brilliant organizer of our people. On the opposite end, we're going to talk about the people. We're going to look at some of the people Bob met when he came here. Okay. Go to the next one. One was his brother Amzie Moore. Again, from Bolivar County, Cleveland, Mississippi. There's a park named from him up there, and they just refurbished his home. Amzie Moore. He was known as a one-man protection agency, SNCC. Why? He was a hospitable Southerner. I'm from California. California people, you don't know how to act, being hosts and stuff like that. We ain't that hospitable coming from Compton, right? I was in high school when the Crips and the Bloods started. We don't know how to act. But wild sometimes. But if you go to Cleveland, Mississippi, during that time, I know y'all crazy here now too. But but if you went in during that time, you went over to somebody's house, they're gonna offer you something to eat, something to drink. They're gonna give you fresh toiletries, fresh pillowcases, and all that on your bed, fresh sheets, some towels. But he would offer you a handgun too, because he felt black or white. If white people came down there to arrested folks to vote, he would offer you that, realizing that you might need that in Mississippi during that time. Go to the next one. Another person, he's up in Steptoe. Now, Bob actually lived with him in a place in Amen County, Mississippi, which y'all know is the most southwestern county in the state. Okay? They used to debate about Mr. Steptoe carrying guns. And Bob thought he wanted to debate because Mr. Steptoe wouldn't say anything anymore about it. But he just didn't tell Bob anymore. Okay? He always carried guns. They even had to beg this brother when he went to testify before Congress. Mr. Steptoe, please leave your 45 at home. You won't need that. Testifying in a congressional hearing. He and his sons were always posed to protect people who stayed at their home. Okay, go to the next one. Vernon Damer. I actually found out about Vernon Damer from Dr. Amari's son-in-law. Okay, before he was married, when he was just courting her daughter. Okay, now I guess he was trying to get on my good side, so he gave me a little bit of information for my dissertation at that time. Okay, Vernon Damer, you look at him, he looked like he could pass for being white, right? Y'all see that? Vernon Damer's grandfather was a wealthy white farmer in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, or really in Forest County. They were outskirts, right? He was able to inherit, and this is rare because my people didn't inherit from the white folks who owned us, right? It was up in our bloodline. We just got sold to the next plantation. So my great-granddaddy looked like a white man. Okay, that was embarrassment, right? So he inherited, he had hundreds of acres of land, he had a country store, cotton mill. He pledged he would pay the property taxes, poll taxes. You know, y'all had to pay the vote, register during that time. He would pay the poll tax if he couldn't afford it. Okay, but Hollis Watkins, who's not here today, told me this story. He would position guns all around his farm. Every now and then he'd take a gun and shoot it up in the air, just to let people know and come up in here. Now you might think it was only men like this. Go to the next slide. Here we see an image we created of Miss Laura McGee. Miss Laura McGee lived in Greenwood, Mississippi, in the Delta. Okay, Miss McGee was a widow. She also owned a farm, had several sons. In one case, night riders came and shot by the house, and her sons returned fire. The next day, police, rather than trying to find out who shot at her house, they harassed Miss McGee and told her, look, don't let your sons shoot at people driving by anymore. She said, don't worry, I'll do the rest of the shooting myself. Okay, I'm gonna try to wrap up. I can keep on going? Okay. Go to the next one. Now, Hartman Turnbull, he's kind of well known, at least amongst movement people in the movement in Mississippi. Many people, Kwame Ture in his autobiography, several mention Hartman Turnbull. Hartman Turnbull, we talked about resistance so far in this lecture. There's another group we need to talk about. You ever heard of snitches? Okay, whenever black folks were planning anything, snitches would go back and tell the white power structure what we were going to do. We don't have snitches today, do we? Anyway, y'all can see I got a little jokes in me. All right. So SNCC, we haven't talked about, and other COFO, all the organizations, SNCC, COFO, and CORE, let me say that, and local NAACPs, they would get enough people who were brave enough to go down to the county courthouse and register to vote. You know, now y'all can register at the bank, the school, library. Then you had to go down to that county courthouse. And you know, y'all been to the county courthouse in a small southern town, right? You had to go down there. And because of the snitches, in this case, the sheriff and them were already there to intimidate folk, right? So they get there, there's a team of people, they would get as many people who were brave enough to attempt to go register to vote. And then the sheriff trying to intimidate them said, what do you N-words want? People were a little bit taken off. They didn't know what to say. Mr. Turnbull's in the group, he cleared his throat and said, sir, all we want to do is to register to vote. Not register, because he's not no PhD or some other Uncle Tom like me, right? He was a farmer with not too much literacy, we'll put it that way. So all we want to do is to register to vote. The Justice Department was there, so they allowed them to go in, but you know, Dr. Mari and I, with our PhDs, we wouldn't have been able to register because you had to register to the satisfaction of the registrar. And it was very subjective, and that's nicely put. Okay, so they weren't able to register. They go home, but all their names were published in the newspaper the next day. And Mr. Turnbull said was the leader of the group. Why? Because he cleared his throat to say all we want to do is to register to vote. So 14 days later, night riders came by the house late at night. They threw a firebomb. How you doing, Brother Hill? They threw a firebomb into the house. Now, he surprised them by coming out shooting. Saved his wife and daughter who exited the house. The night riders, and you'll hear this theme throughout, they weren't there to like fight him and go toe to toe. They would either kill him or intimidate him. Once he came out shooting, they took off. But then he's arrested the next day for what? Setting fire to his own home. There was a campaign and he was released. Later on, he would meet Dr. King. Dr. King asked him about the incident. He told Dr. King, look, I wasn't being non-violent, just protecting my wife and family. Because again, these folks aren't haters. You know, there are some haters in my book. I will say that. People who did hate white folks and they was out for revenge. That's in my book too, if you want that. But the people we're talking about now, they're just trying to protect themselves. You feel me? Because they feel what? Black lives matter. Particularly their black lives, right? And their children and their neighbors, things of that nature. All right? Go to the next one. Okay, more. This is the Freedom House in Austin. You see, during Freedom Summer, they had to do security to protect themselves. Go to the next one. Here's my favorite story actually in the book. A woman by the name of Janie Brewer. Okay, she's in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi. What is Tallahatchie known for? Prison. Anything else? That's where they found Emmett Till's body, and that's where he was killed, right? Okay, so it was a rough place, particularly in 1964, which is 9 years after Emmett Till, right? There was a young woman named Margaret Block who went there to organize. She grew up in Cleveland, Mississippi, which is an urban area, right? In a way, right? It ain't New York, but it's an urban area. And so she goes to Tallahatchie County to organize in 64, early 64, but there's so many death threats, she has to leave the county. They sneak her out in a hearse. Okay. Now, I always say that Margaret got the spirit of Harriet Tubman in her. Why? Because you know how Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery and then she went back 19 times. You know, Dr. Moses escaped from slavery. If I escaped from prison or something like that, you're not going to see my black behind again. But Margaret Block went back to this county after they ran her out of the county. And she meets this woman, Janie Brewer, who's a widow. She has a farm. She has children and grandchildren living on the farm. Okay? And from that family, in the compound they lived in, that became a base that Margaret began to organize. She got some reinforcements from students who came down during Freedom Summer from Howard University. And so they began to organize. So what do? They begin to take people out to register to vote again. But again, the snitches do their job. You know, I guess we need snitches. They just like here with us. How you doing, brother? Bye. All right, see my people in the audience. All right, so the snitches let them know they get down there, they're attacked physically when they get downtown, right, to go register to vote. Then they follow them all the way back to Mrs. Brewer's property. They harass them for a few more days. And so they figure out, damn, can we go back? But then the elder came up with an idea. They went back the next week, attempted to register again. But when they came back to their property, and as they were being pursued by the white supremacists, there were black people on both sides of the road with shotguns and rifles. Again, white supremacists weren't there to fight them. They turned around and left. But Mrs. Brewer knew this was the daytime. When these folks usually come? Come at nighttime. So she prepared for them. She got her children and grandchildren. She armed them. They went out into the cotton fields and waited for them. Then they got the nonviolent SNCC folk and gave them guns and put them out in the cotton fields. They're nonviolent, right? Anyway, put them out in the cotton fields. They waited for them. But the weird part of the story is they're in Mrs. Brewer's house, her and Margaret Block and another young woman, and they're making what you call a Molotov cocktail. Y'all know what that is? Young people don't try this at home. You get a glass bottle, you put gasoline in it, you get a rag, you light it, you can use it as a fire bomb. The problem with this strategy is, how old did I tell you Mrs. Brewer was? 86 years old. So she's pouring gasoline in a bottle, and gas is spilling all on the table. And Margaret Block says, damn, we're gonna die tonight. And everybody's gonna think it was the Ku Klux Klan. And all along it was Mrs. Brewer. But fortunately, No one died that night. But according to plan, when the night riders came, and they did come, imagine with me, this is rural Tallahatchie County. It's nighttime, and it's what we used to call Mississippi nighttime. It's dark. So they driving up, they flash this big floodlight on them, it disorients them. Okay, so they're disoriented. People come out with their rifles and shotguns. Then, well, actually, I should tell you, again, they didn't come to fight them. They turned around, and as they were turning around and leaving, Mrs. Burrow came out with her Molotov cocktail. 86-year-old woman, she throws it, but you know, it misses them. Or she didn't have an arm, I guess, for it, I don't know. How many of you heard stories like this about people in the South? A brother's raising his hand, he's from Laurel, Mississippi, and one of my next projects is to record family stories, because a lot of us in our families, and I feel like if we don't get these stories, they're going to be lost. What are Black people's memory of our resistance in the South? I have some more to present, but I think I want to stop here and engage you all some. So thank you for your attentiveness. I just want to show this is a side of the story that's usually not talked about, and I'm moving in for several reasons. One of the reasons is particularly the period of struggle I'm talking about right now. A lot of people recognize that if they wanted support from northern white liberals, they wanted support from the federal government, Democratic Party, that the thought of Black people with guns scares the hell out of white America. And you're not going to get that support if you did. So they were hoping that they would get that support. But then after Atlantic City, 1964, when it was clear that the Democratic Party, President Johnson, and many of the liberals would not really side on the side of the movement, many people began to move toward just openly talking about and using the rhetoric of, we will shoot back. We could talk about that later on. Thank you all for your attention. Again, free the land.
Free land.
If it's okay, I guess this is the part where we begin to engage in some Q&A with Dr. Umoja. Personally, the part of chapter 1, really piqued my interest in the book because of my background and how you relate this spirit of resistance to Southern folk culture, Black culture, and the trickster character, the two-ness, right? So it seems to be a duality between personas for African American people. They weren't able to be just fully outwardly resistant, right? So could you tell us more about that persona and how it relates to some of the leaders like Medgar Evers?
Good question. Yeah. Good question. I argued, as you mentioned in chapter 1, that in our folk culture, this is the culture that don't come from the intellectuals, that come from the street, right? I guess folk culture now is a lot in hip hop, I would suppose, right? In a lot of our popular culture. But I said there were two major male social constructs. One was a bad Negro. The bad Negro was one who talked a lot of stuff. I guess he was what Pac was, right? Back in the day. He's what, I guess David Banner kind of personified. The bad Negro. My generation, we think about Jim Brown. Tough brother, big brother, scared you, and talks tough. And there were some bad Negroes in some southern towns. In Madison, there was this brother, C.O. Chin, and he wouldn't allow, and I got this from the civil rights workers, he wouldn't allow anybody, any white person other than the sheriff to arrest him. And they would have fist fights on him and the sheriff. He was the quintessential bad Negro. But then you also have another male construct, that's the trickster. The trickster, our elders used to talk about, they hit a lick with a crooked stick. You don't see them coming, you know. And so the trickster, I argued that when Mecker stopped talking about a mama, he was a trickster. The image is that some people think Mecker was nonviolent, but MacArthur Cotton, I saw his picture in the next room. MacArthur Cotton told me that Mecker always drove with a 45 on the seat of his car. And then Mecker told them when I'm saying the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he would say, y'all crazy. But that ain't the Mecker we think about, right? These are people who had up close, intimate conversations with Mecker. His public image is something else. Okay, so that's it with being a trickster. As I mentioned to you, that when I say the early part of this part of the movement, from 1960 to 1964, 65, nonviolence is the public face of the movement, but they had elders on the sidelines with guns. Okay, but it wasn't any talk about this aspect of the movement. You feel what I'm saying? So that's how I see the trickster and the bad Negro interplaying.
And as it relates to folk culture, it has its roots in Africa, right?
No doubt.
Yeah,
No
Yoruba issue, Elegba figure, really.
Legba in Yoruba and Afan culture, Legba is a trickster in that culture. And of course, in tree-speaking people, you got the Nazi, the spider, but the trickster is always important. And that does come emanating from our African tradition. The bad Negro does too. Because bad Negro is, again, somebody who talks tough, acts tough, and we always had in our culture these heroic figures, you know, who were noble and who fought back. And let you know they're going to fight back. You feel me? Not in a bullying type of way, but you don't mess with me type of way. And I think that really comes out more, and I didn't do this in the book, but I wish we had this conversation before, is when this period of time when I say after Freedom Summer, and after people go to Atlantic City, y'all, young people, y'all know about that? Is they create this Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party during Freedom Summer. Okay, the thought is that the racist Mississippi Democratic Party, they who didn't allow black people to participate in a primary, right? You know how now y'all can vote in primaries? You couldn't back in those days in the Democratic primary. And they said that since they didn't allow black people to participate, they were going to create their own multiracial party. They were going to take it to the Democratic Convention and challenge the credentials of the main Democratic Party. And a lot of people were hopeful when they did that. But when they did get support from President Johnson, I don't want to say this, but I am. And most of the civil rights movement leaders even, too, wanted them to take a compromise. I should have said that. Most of the civil rights movement leaders wanted them, even Dr. King, wanted them to take it. I couldn't say this in Atlanta. They wanted them to take a compromise. And the people like Fannie Lou Hamer, they were pissed. You know, they said they didn't come, they offered them 2 seats in the entire delegation. They said they didn't come here for no damn 2 seats.
When all of us is tired.
Huh? Yeah, when all of us is tired. When all of us is tired. And I could even say some more on that, but I'm not going to go there. But once that happened, a lot of people after that say, look, we can't rely on these people no more. We got to rely on our own resources. What does that mean? Before they were thinking the federal government's going to come intervene and protect folks, right? Even though, again, Bernard Damer, Harvey Turnbull, E.W. Steptoe, Laura McGee, all those people are providing security. But after that, more young people in the movement started to say, we got to defend ourselves. We can't depend on the federal government no more. And they take more bad Negro approach. That's where the title of the book, We Will Shoot Back, comes from, because Charles Evers publicly stated at that time, I have the greatest respect for Dr. Martin Luther King, but nonviolence won't work in Mississippi. If a white man shoots at us, we will shoot back. So it's more open, like, and when that's being said, it was kind of like, well, okay, we're going to say this, and people know, hey, you might not want to come up in here. Yeah, how many young people, how many of you heard of the Deacons for Defense? Okay, the Deacons for Defense were a group that was started in Louisiana, and Dr. Hill's hometown was one of the major places, Bogalusa. You don't know, I know it's history. Okay, but in Bogalusa was one of their strongholds. They started a place in northern Mississippi called Jonesboro, Mississippi, Louisiana, near where Dr. Omar is from. She's from Shreveport. So I know all y'all professors history. All right, and they became more of a group dedicated for the protection of people. And then you had Deacons for Defense groups here in Mississippi also. A lot of counties adopted the Deacons for Defense as a means to protect people. And then a lot of the leaders openly would say during that time, look, you come in here, we're going to defend and protect ourselves. We will shoot back. Okay, so it kind of changed the focus of the movement. That's not really talked about. The other piece in Mississippi that is very important, and when you talk about the movement, you can't just think what happened in other places happened here. Boycotting was very important. And the boycotts were used more effectively after this period too, because again, you don't even have to ask the federal government to come do anything about the boycott. If they don't answer the demands, you're just gonna shut the town down. You feel me? It's just about you not going to shop in them stores. And if some of our people wanted to stop in them stores, then we had something for them too. Y'all know what I'm saying? It was something, if you went and shopped at the store, if you wanted like one of them snitches and they caught you, they're like Bernie Mac used to say, there'll be consequences and repercussions. We're going to shop in the store downtown. So a lot of these things is really what created a lot of the change in many counties and towns in Mississippi. Yes,
I have a
sir.
question, sir. Being that we're in Mississippi, and sometimes that we often hear about Martin Luther King, making errors, we so often forget about the sheroes who made it possible for the movement in the state of Mississippi.
Yes,
Can
sir.
you elaborate to the audience about some of the things about the women did in this movement and how important it was the women were into this movement, and particularly the overall movement?
Well, here's one thing now. Y'all notice I had photos of the men and I had sketches of the women because the women I focused on, I couldn't find photos of. I think Margaret Block helped me find one I might be able to get soon, but it's very hard. It made me wonder, like, why, what was going on there? But sisters, I say sisters, because women were very important in terms of the movement. I showed you about Miss McGee and Miss Brewer. There's also another sister that was very important in a place, and y'all know what Macomb is. When I'm other places, I got to talk in different ways. But in Macomb, Mississippi, the movement there, one of the stories I have is a sister by the name of Ora Bryant. Ora Bryant, she and her husband were involved in a tradition that happened during that time when there was hostility in communities. In a lot of households, husbands and wives would take turns doing security. So Miss Dace might go to sleep and her husband would be up for 4 hours. And then when it was time for him to go to sleep, she would be up with a shotgun or rifle, or whatever they had. In the case of Mrs. Bryant, y'all got to excuse me on a little jet lag from getting up at 5 o'clock this morning to get here. All right, in the case of Mrs. Bryant, when her husband was asleep and she's on post, night riders came by their house. Now, because black people in Macomb during that period of time start shooting back, these night riders didn't place bombs up to their house, walk up to their house and place a bomb, because black people were shooting back. So they would do like a drive-by and throw the dynamite. As soon as this guy started to throw the dynamite out, she saw it, she started lighting him up, lighting up the car. And that woke up the neighbors, and the car was lit up all the way down the street. Okay, but that's one case. Many of the women also told me, in terms of this relationship, the armed self-defense, a lot of the elder women told me that how they learned how to shoot was from their parents, because a lot of times their parents were concerned about white rapists. So they taught their daughters how to shoot. So the women are very much involved in this tradition. But I will cite one exception. When the deacons were created, the deacons were thought to be as a male organization. And so, and since it became more of like, this group of people's responsibility to protect the community, then it became more of a male thing to do. It always was an emphasis on men, but it came even more so with the deacons. And in fact, their appeal was, it's time for you men to step up and be men to defend the community. So you did have that more of an emphasis. But I would say even after that, in a place in northern Mississippi, you have boycott movements going on in the 70s, mid-70s to the late 70s. And when they started searching men for guns coming to demonstrations, the women would bring the guns. They would hide them in their purses or whatever. So you've always had women involved in this armed resistance.
Hey, Doc, so when James Meredith was on his march coming from Memphis to Peabody Hotel, and he had a picture. He's often at the Kroger's. I see him at the Kroger's.
Yeah, I used to see him over there too.
Yeah, so he had a picture with a deacon in front of him. And then after he was shot, they carried the march on down.
Right.
I had an opportunity, a unique opportunity to see Jim Brown say something to Andrew Young, and Andrew Young shot back. Jim Brown said, I've never been, for this nonviolent stuff. He wasn't talking to Andrew Young, but they were like right in close proximity to each other in the house.
Right.
Andrew Young said, well, we weren't nonviolent for the sake of being nonviolent. He said, we had the deacons with us when we got beat down in Canton. He didn't say beat down. He said, they took the same beat that we took.
Right.
And so I think it's not a romanticizing, but I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to those courageous nonviolent folk who were on the front lines getting beat. But this just was an exchange that was so unique, and he responded like, shit, y'all went on the front lines with us, So that was just something that really was.
Let's build on that story. And y'all can see this in Eyes on the Prize, Canton, Mississippi. What happens here is, y'all, for those who don't know, y'all know about everybody know about the James Meredith March?
Yeah.
He's supposed to march to show black people they have nothing to be afraid of anymore. We can come out and register to vote. But down there, as soon as he get in the state of Mississippi, he's shot, right? And then Dr. King and SELC, SNCC, and CORE, they decided to continue the march. Really, NAACP and Urban League want to continue it too.
He said that was a staged photo too with Martin Luther King. He said that was staged.
Which one?
When Martin Luther King came in, they had a picture with him and James Meredith.
Oh yeah.
He said that was staged.
Because it was, because he would have been in the hospital when Dr. King first got there.
He said there's a picture with them, and he
Right.
told Coretta to get out of the way, and she hadn't spoken to him since. Go ahead.
Anyway, so they make a decision because the Deacons for Defense come and they say that they want to provide security for the march. And some groups left because they didn't want to have them. But Dr. King actually agreed that the deacons should be there as long he was concerned about them being intermixed in the march, but they could be in the front and behind to look out for these Klansmen and whatever. And there were a few exchanges between the deacons and Klansmen. But, oh Lord. This will get to what you said.
They went to Greenwood, started the Black
So when they get to Canton, thank you. I'm getting old, y'all. Okay, when they get to Canton, you know, they wanted to camp at a public school, a segregated school, and the school board didn't give them permission, and they made the decision they're going to camp here anyway. They took that militant position they were going to do that. And so when they get there and they camp, the state troopers come in with the local police and they tear gas them. Now one person asked me years later, well, what happened to the deacons? How come they didn't do anything? Because you see this on Eyes of the Prize. And I had to call Hollis Watkins and he provided the answer for me. The deacons were not established to fight police. They're there to fight Ku Klux Klansmen. And so, they, not only was that not their charge for that particular day, but Dr. King and Floyd McKissick told them to stand down. Because it would have been ugly. See, the thing about the deacons weren't just a shoot 'em up group. They were disciplined. You couldn't just, thank you. Oh, here, you got this one right. Okay. They, unlike the Black Panther Party for self-defense, anyone, you know, Panthers, anybody off the street could join. The deacons, they were selective about who they recruited. Usually it was somebody they knew over generations. People went to school together, went to the same church, they were part of lodges, they were in athletic clubs, you know. So it was people who had a trust built in, and then there was some maturity. So it wasn't just like no wild shooting type group. They were a disciplined organization with a chain of command. Not saying the Panthers didn't have that, but the Panthers, anybody could come in, they weren't as disciplined as you find the deacons. One thing of evidence I will give you for that is if you look at their COINTEL profiles, the surveillance files, you'll see more informant information coming from inside of the Panthers. You don't see any coming from the deacons. You know, you see people outside the organization infiltrating them. And to your point, I don't want anybody to think that this presentation or this book doesn't value nonviolent direct action. I was asked this question the other night. Nonviolence actually, tactically, is very important and very courageous. If you think about people who engage in sit-ins, even more than that, if you think about people who engage in the freedom rides, knowing that you're going to get the hell beat out of you when you get to one of these towns. You know, particularly a town where the police decide not to show up and protect you. You feel me? You got to be very courageous. I think what I do want to emphasize is this, though, is only a minority of the folk were really nonviolent. Because you got to think, to be that disciplined, to take that type of physical abuse, maybe even loss of life, it takes somebody who's very special. It takes somebody who's either highly religious or highly ethical to want to put your life. You know, I'm almost going to put figures like that with like Jesus Christ. You feel me? It has to be somebody who's on a higher level, and most people aren't that. You know what I mean? In terms of Southern culture, there were more people involved in self-defense, armed resistance, things of that nature. And the other point I want to make, and I think it should be emphasized in my book, is really the narrative has been historically up until recently to only talk about the nonviolence, to not talk about people protecting themselves. And so I think when that happens, it gives us an unrealistic view. How many of y'all saw the movie Selma? There's a piece in here, I know for some it'll be a spoiler alert, okay? There's a piece in a movie where that actually happened, where after they beat people on the Evan Pettis Bridge and they
followed them. The state troopers weren't just satisfied with beating them on the bridge. They followed them all the way back into the black community. And there's a scene in the movie which actually happened where Andy Young is telling people, like, look, this is not the time to be violent. Okay, another side of that story is Wilson Baker, who was the Selma Director of Public Safety. His testimony, you can read it in the book, My Soul is Rested by Howard Raines. It's a collection of oral histories. What he says is, Wilson Baker says is this: black people were coming, because they chased them into a project into the hood. Okay? Wilson Baker says black people were coming out their homes with, you know, the guns we got. You know, there wasn't no highly developed military weapon, you know. It's not like now in the hood. It was then, 1965. They were coming out with these weapons, with knives, switchblades, rocks, bottles. And Baker tells this, Jim Clark, the head of the state troopers, like, look, it's about to be a bloodbath. And it's not just going to be black blood flowing. And he says that was a critical thing that made them back up and get out. So there are elements to this story that are oftentimes left out. Another piece to that movie. We saw Malcolm in the movie. Oh, okay. Why you say, look? I was happy they had Malcolm. I said, damn, they had Malcolm up in the movie. I thought they were going to leave that part out.
Not the Malcolm we know.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're not, I was just happy to see it. Because usually, Malcolm, okay, but they say that, King was in jail, as you saw in the movie. A lot of people in Selma said that King was let out of jail after Malcolm had been there. Now, what they didn't show you was Malcolm speaking. You could go on YouTube and see that. Malcolm speaking to the audience of young people or something, and they was feeling him. It wasn't like, boo, get out of here. No, they was feeling Malcolm X. So it was like, damn, we got to get King back out here. You know what I mean? So there are elements to the story that's oftentimes left out. And that's what I want to try to portray. Not a disrespect for nonviolence. Because truth be told, looking at what's happening in Ferguson and stuff, our young people doing nonviolence direct action today has been very effective. So we don't want to diss that part of the movement, but we want to also recognize there were other dynamics going on. Brother Spaz.
Yes, sir. A pleasure being here and finally meeting you in person. And I enjoyed the presentation immensely. Two questions quickly. The first one, Dr. King also contributes to this, I guess, dichotomy of sorts between nonviolence and resistance, armed resistance. So when he goes to the North, he himself talks about how black people in the North aren't having the nonviolent stuff. And so I'm wondering what was about that period, perhaps, that might have made blacks in the North less willing to go the nonviolent route. And then secondly, I don't know if you heard those stories in Compton. When I was a kid in LA, Inglewood, I heard a story about trains coming in and leaving weapons for people to get. And so 2015, our hoods are awash with weapons. Right. And there's this debate about gun control.
Exactly.
NAACP is advocating gun control. I've heard Harry Belafonte very, very adamant that black people have to get behind gun control. Right. And then you have this narrative of armed self-defense, which seems to be somewhat at odds with that idea. So I'm just wondering what your personal view is about the current debate about gun control.
Very good, very good. So the first one again, though.
Oh, the first was about blacks in the North doing King's Day.
I think that's a stereotype. Again, the story I just gave you about Selma, this entire book, I think that's a stereotype. Northerners are so militant and then Southerners are so passive. I remember I used to hate it when stuff would happen. My friend called me from New York. We wouldn't take that stuff in New York. What stuff would they take up there? No, so I think it's a stereotype. I think there's always been, in fact, again, I think more black people in the South actually, I'll just tell you my personal thing, just when I was doing this as a dissertation. When I found so many instances of self-defense, I was like, man, there's only a few people who are really nonviolent. You know what I mean? So, and then you got to think, a lot of the nonviolence wasn't necessarily Southerners. It was people, a lot of times, who came to the South. So it's again, I think a person who could truly be committed to nonviolence, philosophically and then in practice, I think is somebody who's either religious or had very intellectual. You know what I mean? And who can not only just spout in it because you had to do it, right? So but I don't think it's the regional argument. I think is a stereotype. Now the second one.
The second one's about gun control.
Oh, good Lord, have mercy. Actually, there's a blog I wrote on it. This was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I think I put on my Facebook page. Because yeah, I'm from where you're from. And we did hear stories like, I mentioned it to y'all, I think when I was in high school, that's when the Crips and the Bloods started. And we used to hear a lot of rumors. I can't prove them. But a lot of people believed there were guns like mysteriously put in our community. And it was like the proliferation of arms. Now, if you don't believe that, we do know that the increase of the, underground economy. And that's why in the hood now, you have AK-47s and Glock 9s and stuff like that, that some people got in their homes. Yeah. Now, I argue that guns are sometimes in the most unstable elements of our community. And that, keeping it real, you think about a place like Chicago and other places, it's a problem. You know, it's a problem. People are dying. And so, but then the history of America, this is what creates the conflict. History of America has been trying to disarm black people. Right. So there's like a fear of, damn, we give up these guns, what's going to happen? I will say this, I'm in favor of what they call background checks. Mental illness and guns ain't a good match. They ain't no good match. I'll say this, they ain't put this on the table. Substance abuse, alcohol, and guns is not no good match. You and I, if you're from South Central, you're from Compton, Inglewood, you know that before a lot of those things, the boys been up there drinking, right. And that's when they get ready to do their thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not a good match. So I'm opposed to both of those things personally. And shoot, if we do get back in office, I feel that's something that we might want to look at. I don't know. But on the other hand, let me say this. I'm going to leave my thing alone. I am concerned about, if Jigo Scott, he had this song. He said, when other folk give up theirs, I give up mine. Right. Okay, you know, since President Obama's been elected, the gun sales have gone up. Ferguson get elected, gun sales go up. Who buying these damn weapons? White people. And so, if we're not in a position where, looking at what happened with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, we're not in a position to say we're going to be totally without weapons. But to me, weapons is not the critical thing. I think the people who this book is about, their communities were more cohesive than our communities today. They had more of a tendency to watch each other's backs. We tend to be a little bit more materialistic and individualistic today. Yeah. And so I think the question is can we put our communities tighter together? Can we begin to watch each other's back? My wife said this, I always want to steal it and take credit for it, but she said, what would have happened? Y'all know Trayvon was coming home. Where my cell phone at? I just always like to be dramatic. Trayvon's coming home. He said, you know, this creepy ass cracker, but this creepy man is following me. He's on talking to, what's her name, Janelle? What if he said, call my daddy, call my neighbors, and people actually came out? It'd be a different story. So we got to strive to get that type of connection back in our community and organization. Yeah. Where we're watching each other's back and we're protecting each other because it is a state of emergency. Yeah. You know, when I mentioned that 313 people were killed in 2012, that was probably undercounted. One for every 28 hours. you know, y'all, after Mike Brown was being killed, y'all, the young people, y'all on the damn internet, you know, and that's one of the ways we've been getting all this information, right? People say this happened in Cleveland, this is happening here, this is happening there. It's like, damn, you know, every 2 days, it's something happening with our people. So no, I don't think we should give up our guns, but we should have gun control.
Baba, do you own a weapon, and if so, what level are you?
Man, don't put me out there like that. Come on, brother. we don't, all right, let me say one thing for that.
Yeah.
After Mike Brown, you saw these brothers, they called themselves in Dallas or somewhere, the Huey Newton Gun Club, and they came out with parades. Hey, we ain't gotta put all our stuff out there like that. We gotta be slick. Go ahead.
One of David's questions a little bit, and you have just made one part of it, I thought would be the point. Which was last time, and also using the phone example. And that is when we look at this broad issue, there isn't a time in which black people in this period in Mississippi were using weapons in an offensive way. And you know, I can tell you my own personal story of growing up, and everybody that I know had guns. I had an uncle who I spent every summer with in Austin. People used them in their defensive way. And so much so that there were people in the neighborhood who knew not to mess with that person. That person had a gun. And a lot of the current literature on self-defense, on defensive activities, tend to start with making the assumption that somehow people have these guns in an offensive way. Back in a decade ago, when Showtime made an ad the movie Deacon for the Fence, I called them. Because when I saw the first snippet, I knew they had got it all wrong. Not only in terms of how they developed these characters, but the one person who should have had the central role in it should have been a woman. Because the civil rights movement would not have happened without this particular woman.
Wow.
So that never occurred. Of course, Showtime told me that they were going to still show the movie anyway.
Right.
But so there is this issue here of people using guns in a defensive way.
Right.
And I think that it's always important to, in fact, put that point out there. Because when you go back over all of this history, you mentioned Howard. Howard always carried a gun in his car. And you said none of those people went around telling people we have guns. And they certainly did not have symbols to suggest that we had them. And I think that as we make sense of this history, it's very, very important that we, in fact, put the accurate narrative out there. And so even when I knew they was going to put in the Selma movie the piece with Andy Young telling the person about, because that's one of Andy Young's stories.
Right.
Now whether that happened or not, I do not know, but of course the story is we have to keep the narrative the way that it is. And so I think that it's always very, very important, especially in these kind of settings when you have students who don't read, by the way, that really don't know this history, to in fact make that point, that when you look at this history, these are people who in fact understand themselves to be human beings. They understand enough about the law, right, to know that they have a right to have these arms. And if you mess with me, I'm going to also demonstrate how much of a citizen I am, because I'm going to in fact use them to defend myself. So I just want you to sort of add a little bit to this point, because when you look at this state, all of these cases where it seems people are in fact defenseless, when in fact they aren't. And at those moments when indeed they have to defend themselves, they do so. They have done so.
Yeah, I agree with that. In the main, I think there are some exceptions. So for instance, and this is more in the case of, I make a distinction in the introduction between what I call self-defense, which is people, protecting their lives and property and neighbors and things of that nature, from retaliation. Retaliation, if somebody did something, threw something here or shot it here, then tomorrow some of us go get them. That's retaliation. That's different from self-defense. Self-defense is we try to stop them right here from harming us, right? And so there were some cases of that are in the book, the main is self-defense. And that's the tradition that most people participate in. You do have cases where people retaliate, and one I have in the book, and it took me a long time to put this together. When I was doing my research for my dissertation, because a lot of this is based on my dissertation, it was done years ago, decades ago, now. I did an interview with a brother here in Jackson, and he told me that in 1969, there was a group of people who had been in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee who decided they were going to retaliate against the people who committed crimes against black folk. And so he said, you know, because of the nature of it, he wasn't telling me a whole bunch of names. And I didn't want to get a whole bunch of names. But he did tell me 2 names. He said Ralph Featherstone, brother named Shay Payne. He told me a third party who I won't mention who knows something about it. When I talked to that third party, that brother started looking up in the air. He would say nothing about it. But he said the one thing they did, he said they shot somebody who was a part of the Emmett Till, shot at a person who was involved in the Emmett Till lynching. And so I said, wow. So I was thinking, I was looking up in the Delta to find out evidence of this. I couldn't find anything. So it's not in the dissertation because I couldn't find corroboration. But lo and behold, when I'm working on a book, you know, years later, I found all the components that were in police reports, newspapers and things of that nature. In this particular case, in West Point, Mississippi, they had a school desegregation campaign going on. And someone set the office on fire that was coordinating that campaign. Within 24 hours in that county, some people dynamited the county courthouse, blew it up. And then 5 minutes later, after the bombing, this white man who people believed, I don't think there's evidence to prove it, people believed he was involved in Emmett Till, said he'd been bragging about it. And people shot him. He didn't die. Also, the person name he gave me, Ralph Featherstone, who had moved from Mississippi at that point, was living in D.C. He was seen in town that night. And he wasn't in town. Now, somebody told me independently how he got in and out of town. It was supposed to have been a crop duster. Somebody with a crop dusting plane brought him in, flew him back out. They arrested some people for it, but they apparently arrested the wrong people when they got off. But so you did have a few cases like that where there's retaliation going on. There are a few other cases. Because what I think is this, I agree with you in the main, most of us about protecting and defending ourselves. But then, black community, just like we have nonviolence, we have armed resistance, even within the context of armed resistance, you got, we're not homogeneous. We got different type of folk, different type of personalities, different people, I don't know. But so I think some of that does exist. And the motion I mentioned to was around the same time in the North, you had the Black Liberation Army being formed. And again, that's not a northern-southern phenomenon because one of the main people in that is Geronimo Gijaga, who's from Morgan City, Louisiana. And then another person in it was from Yazoo City, Herman Bell. So again, it's not a regional phenomenon necessarily, but I think that period of time in the movement, you had a lot of people who were thinking about underground movements, developing paramilitary groups that are secretive, and that was just a stage of the movement at that time. Brother Shokwa ended up defending some of those people in trials and stuff.
And actually, this last discussion kind of touched on what I wanted to ask about. But if you can contextualize why telling this part of the narrative is so important, and put it within the other, you have the two, the bad man, the trickster, But I also add a third one into that category, which may or may not be synonymous with the bad man. Sometimes they would just call the crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, the crazy N-word. And usually those were brothers who, and some sisters, who just refused to deal with the system the way it was set up. As a matter of fact, the color purple, the character that Oprah played. Yeah.
Sophia.
Sophia.
Not Sophia, but Sophia.
Sophia characterized that, right? When the white woman asked her to take care of her children, she said, hell no. So that's one of the ways that we have, it's a tool of oppression, right? It's a tool of oppression to perpetuate these stereotypes in a way that constrain behavior. So with that in mind, can you talk about why it's so important? Because we're not homogeneous.
You can tell she's a psychologist, right? That's important. I remember, and in the context of segregation, what we're talking about is a crazy NIWGA, not NIWGR. No, where's the joke? Okay, the crazy, you know they catch the joke. All right, but the crazy N-word was anybody who did not deal with what was expected during segregation, right? Anybody who would challenge authority. And again, you had some people who didn't do that. C.O. Chen I mentioned, I talk about in the book, he was told, they had some traditions in some communities because there's so much sharecropping going on, and they wanted black people to be in a servile position. During the week, you couldn't be in dress clothes. You had to look like you were working. And so he wore dress clothes during the week, and he got in a confrontation with a white man who said he was supposed to be in, like he was working on a plantation or something. So, and that's how he got a reputation as a crazy Negro. Because when he was a teenager, he had that confrontation with white men, and people was like, oh, that Negro is crazy. Black and white people leave him alone. But one of the things that, there was a brother who just recently passed, who was a member of CORE, who did some work in Mississippi, but most in Louisiana, Rudy Lombard. And he told me this, what was significant about the movement was we went from having a one or two crazy Negroes to a whole community of crazy Negroes. People willing to be confrontational and take steps that challenged segregation, willing to do things. And I guess that's happening again when we look at some of the stuff that's happened post-Ferguson. For years, my generation has been putting down young people, just dissing young people, just being totally disrespectful to young people. And we're seeing this movement emerge from a younger generation being confrontational about, the value of black people's lives, right? So that's what the movement does when it takes shape, when you got people, a significant amount of people willing to challenge authority.
First question. We were talking about crazy N-words. And in any other relationship, we could just call them non-conformists. So they just do not conform to the regular standard, systems. But we have different terminology when we're talking about ourselves. Why is that, number one? But number two, just before I came here, I was with a group of high school students, primarily, well, all African American, not primarily. And one of the students, unfortunately, I was just the audience, I wasn't responding. One of the students' immediate statement was, how are can you explain how things were then, since now everything is equal? You know, and it sent something down my spine, and the response that I think that she received was not one that I would have given. So I would like to ask you all, what your response has been.
Well, you know, I have a reputation as a teacher, professor, of being, like, I try to listen to all opinions and I try to value everything. One time I lost it was about a year ago. One of my students said we live in a post-racial society. And I said, what? And I started listening all these statistics, not just the murders, the subprime mortgages, the this, the that, the other. But I just think there's so much data out there to really begin to challenge it. That, you know, y'all have to forgive me, I'll be one to curse sometimes. But all that's bullshit. You know what I mean? And sometimes cursing is the best way you can do it. So I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not a Jackson State employee, so. But, you know, just, you know, and you can't really blame the young person that's sitting because they're being bombarded with this information. But, you know, I remember after Obama was elected in 2008 and all this stuff was really pushed. But then it hasn't, you know, right after Obama was elected, you had Oscar Grant, right? And I think there was some killings of young blacks in New Orleans around the same time. And then just as we're aware, and really I have to credit young people for utilizing social media to make us more aware that it's happening at the rate it's going on. Because even myself, when I originally did this presentation, you know, I was thinking about the period of lynchings. And lynching is different, it's a public display and all of that. But just the rate and numbers of black people being killed is, you know, it's still happening. You know, and when, before Dr. Mari and I met, living in Los Angeles, I remember in 1976, just in Los Angeles, there were 52 black people killed by police. So it's not, there's something been going on, but I think social media has been making us more aware. Well, this is happening here, this is happening there, you know what I mean? And especially since it's not on the commercial media, social media does it, and when people react, then it's on commercial media, right? When people had a video of this or that, then it's put out there. So it might be one of the reasons that people are talking about trying to control that a little bit more. But, so, I don't know. But
well, Bob, I think, too, the student is saying that, so 2015 is not 1965. And so there's been something like progress. And so I guess the brute aspects of white supremacy aren't as in your face as they were in 1954.
It's more sophisticated.
Yes, and so that's what when a student says, you know, we're equal, he or she is really saying that it's not like it was.
And I can agree with that, and I totally agree with that. You know, the one thing that and I've just heard this, and I forget where it was, but we can talk about having an old Mississippi that we want to get away from and a new Mississippi that we want to get to, but we never want to talk about the transition of Mississippi that we're in now. And so this is the, you know, we're not equal. You know, there's no level of equality that a high school student should think that they have at this current time. Not only in Mississippi, but within the United States.
Right.
I mean, but I mean, there should be some way of them understanding the real situation in which they're living in, not necessarily saying, I want to instill fear within you or diminish your possibility. But I think there needs to be some level of reality also within all of us.
No doubt. Noelle, would you give us a point of information?
I was going to say that we need to have some time for book signing so that people can buy books and then have refreshments, because a lot of students have 2 o'clock class and midterms, I believe. So.
Okay.
Let me just make one quick point, because I'm with Sister Bays on this question. But I go to it this way. I believe that there is today a new form of passing. And I believe that that form of passing is explicit in the thought that there is equality. But I also think it is quite implicit in the fact that if you talk long enough to, how do you use what young people sort of say that, to young people, you will come to understand that they see themselves as minorities. They can't conceptualize themselves outside of that particular group, if you will.
Right.
I believe that's a new form of passing. Because outside of what you might see on television in person, inside social media and so forth, when you begin to have these discussions, folk don't have a context in them. So as they see themselves in this post-de jure racial segregation world, right, in terms of how they have been socializing, they would in fact believe, they do in fact believe that there is this thing called equality. Now they cannot talk about it, especially when you get up and talk about where the statistics are, what the numbers show, what the reality is out here. They would cling to this thing that, I am a minority in this context. And I think that has some very powerful, what I like to call some very powerful cultural psychological implications for how we begin to understand where we are to go when we think about where Mississippi is today. I mean, and none of this is subtle. It's not subtle at all. If you listen to the governor in a state that has the poorest education system in the country, thinks that, well, that can be solved if you do something about teenage pregnancy, for example. Right? I mean, that sounds like some eugenic stuff to me. Right? So I think that we have a serious problem here. And not just in these high schools.
No.
I talked to enough folk who are in college at Jackson State who in fact know that. So I think that's what is going on. I think the problem is a very serious one. As we think about how black people are going to control the discourse about who we are and where we are in the 21st century. If Black Lives Matter, then we ought to have a real discussion about what all this actually means, because I'm not quite convinced while I see things, and I applaud these efforts to in fact protest. I'm not convinced that there's enough understanding about the context of that so that we can find continuity from where we have been to where we are now, where it is that we want to and go. These things peter out too fast. The fact that they peter out so fast tells me everything I need to know about the possibilities. They are very limited. And let me make one final point. None of this surprises me that is happening in this age of Obama. I expected it to happen in this age of Obama. Right? I mean, if you go back to the first black president, Bill Clinton, people say he's a black president, you will find that the increase of incarceration of black people became structural. Right? You will also find that Clinton pushed 3 strikes you out. You will also find that Clinton welfare and also the boot camps. Right. But yet, black folk are told by the Negro elite, this is your friend here. Right?
First black president, wasn't it?
Fast forward to 08 into now, one should not be surprised.
Well, just in closing, our oppression is more sophisticated. It's analogous to the movie The Matrix. In The Matrix, people thought they were, free living in society, and they were really, the blood, the energy was being sucked out of them by this machine control world. And we live in a society that you got a 1% that controls the majority of the resources. We're working, told to do more with less, so it's like they're sucking the blood out of us. At the same time, we're told we're equal. And so I think it's important. I feel like happy that I'm a professor because I get to talk to young people about this on my campus and around the country. And so I think in every area we are, in the museum, whatever, we got to be Morpheus. You know what I mean? We have to bring this information out. The system is not going to do it. And so those of us who know, even as students, let your peers know, or those of us who were part of religious institutions, wherever you be, you can play the role of Morpheus and wake more people up. And if we do it in unison, we will have a movement. All right. So I want to thank y'all.
I'm so proud of Jackson State University where having such a prominent role.
And I want to thank Jackson State University also for bringing me here. What better place for me to come? In fact, I was wondering what took y'all so long. We've been out since 2013, but this is the best place for me to come. Of course, the shootings at Jackson State in 1970 talked about in the book, as well as the impact it had locally on the movement and this piece. So to me, this is Jackson State is sacred ground, as well as Toulouse, sacred ground for our people in the struggle, not just for black people in Mississippi. As Brother Keith said in starting, it's important not only for the state of Mississippi, he said the nation, I say the world. The world learned from this struggle here in this state. So give Jackson State, my friend Akil here, he was an important part in helping me do the book, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement.